Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming out. I know it's such a hard time this Sunday. I guess we're leading up to the Yom Tov, and everyone's got so much going on. So really, it's a wonderful thing that everyone finds time to come and to learn. So we really appreciate you being here and joining us. For our topic for today, we are going to explore the Haftorah that we read on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. It's the story of Hannah. Why do we read her story? Well, it's a nice parallel to the Torah reading, which is the story of Sarah giving birth to Yitzchak. And the Gemara tells us that Hashem remembered Sarah and Hannah and Rachel and Yosef, although he wasn't remembered for childbirth, but he was remembered for being freed from prison. All of those chasadim from Hashem, he remembered them on Rosh Hashanah. That was the day. But it's more than that. It's more than just the personal story of one woman's struggle with infertility, which in and of itself is a horrible experience to go through with her. And the text really helps us appreciate and empathize with the struggle that she's going through. But as the mother of Shmuel Hanavi, it's also a story that speaks to the entire Jewish people. It's the first chapter of Sefer Shmuel, which is really a turning point in Jewish history. Because as the text begins, if you can look on the page, we're not going to read every pasuk inside, and unfortunately we won't have time to cover everything, but we'll do the highlights for sure. But the text begins with the word Vayehi. So if anyone has ever studied, like Sefer Ruth begins with Vayehi, I always liken it to the scary music that you hear in a movie or a TV show before anything on the screen is scary, right? But it just, that something ominous is going to happen. That's the theme when you hear the word Vayehi. So here it's actually something good that happens in this case, but it's describing the times, right? The times we're coming off of Sefer Shoftim, where there's this terrible pattern for hundreds of years, for centuries, of poor leadership. I mean, the Shoftim were wonderful people, but they didn't have a central seat of authority over the Jewish people. And the proof was that every time they got their act together and things were good, it didn't take that long for them to slide off the derech again. And then Hashem would send an enemy to attack, and then we'd do tshuva, and he'd send a new shofet. And this was the endless pattern of Sefer Shoftim, with the constant repetition of everyone did what was right in their own eyes, because there was no king amongst the Jewish people. So it was a very tragic time for the Jewish people. A lot of suffering, a lot of persecution that went on, and clearly the people needed a good central body of leadership. And then in addition to that, Eli, who was the Kohen Gadol, who's a character in our story, he was an elderly man at this point, and we know that his two sons didn't quite embody the same integrity of service to the Mishkan that their father had. God forbid, no one's accusing them of doing anything terrible, even though the text accuses them of doing something terrible. The Gemara qualifies it and says essentially that one of the things they did, just to give you an example of why people were cynical about coming to the Mishkan, was that when women would come to offer their korbanot after giving birth, so they would delay them. They wouldn't put them first on the list, even if they got there first. Why? Because the korban that a woman offers is a little bird, right? Not a whole lot of meat on a little bird, right? So they would take the people who had these larger animals, the bulls and the cows and the sheep and the goats. So it would be a bigger feast. And Nebuch, these poor women made the effort to travel and were away from their families. I can't imagine they were away from their babies, but it's very hard to travel with your newborn. And so because they were behaving this way and not treating people properly and respectfully, and again having that integrity to the process of what avodas Hashem means, people became cynical. Why should I bother to go? Why should the Mishkan be a central place of worship in my life? I'm not going to bother if that's the way they're going to treat me. So that's the Vayehi. That's how the context in which the story starts out. But then it introduces us to this man Elkanah, and it says he was Ish Echad, one man, right? So you can just read that at face value, just one person who happened to make a difference. But what was so unique about him was that he made the great discovery that all of us need to make at certain points in our lives, not to confuse Judaism with Jews. Right? So yes, everybody was cynical, and this is the way they were behaving at the Mishkan, and people figured, why should I bother going? What's the point if this is how they're going to treat people? But he realized, no, Judaism has its own integrity, its own system of serving Hashem. There's a way to bring a korban, there's a way to come close to God, and even if it's not being done the right way, that's a fault of the people, that's not a fault of the system. And so he really made an effort to go and to try to include people and encourage people to go to serve Hashem and encounter God at the Mishkan as well. Rashi brings down on the words that he was ish echad, that he was one person, highlights that first Mishnah that we know in Pirkei Avot, that Moshe kibel Torah misinai, and then he gave it to Yehoshua, who gave it to the Zakanim, to the Nevi'im, to the Anshe Knesset Gedolah, that there's a chain to the Masorah, but there's always one person who's the next link in the chain. Right? So there's one person who sort of represents what comes before them and is the one who transfers it down to the one that comes after him. And Elkanah, being the person he was, who had a broader perspective on life and not so cynical or hypocritical, he was that one link in the chain, right? Judaism isn't taught in a lecture hall of a professor and 300 people. It's a one-to-one contact. It's a Rebbe to a Talmud. It's a parent to a child. And that's the message that the text is trying to convey to us. Okay, goes on to describe this Elkanah, so that he had two wives, right? He had Hannah and he had Penina. Now, this seems to be a pattern in Tanakh of men having more than one wife. We know that it was allowed. There was nothing that was prohibited in such a thing. I mean, certainly if that was the case, if Abraham had more than one wife, if Yaakov had more than one wife. The problem in this case was it was never encouraged. It sounds very funny to a Western civilization living in the 21st century, but back in the day, if a woman didn't have an opportunity to get married, she really could not make a life for herself, right? She was either dependent on her parents to support her, or she was dependent on her husband to support her. It wasn't that she could go out and get an education in an apartment on the Upper West Side and have a fantastic career and, be part of a community that she could contribute to. It just wasn't the reality. And in the days where there were wars and there was disease and longevity wasn't quite the way that we have it now, you had the precursor to our shidduch crisis. There were more women than there were men, right? What do you do? So the Torah allowed, in a case like that, for a man to take in more than one wife. That, Nebuch, this woman shouldn't be a spinster her whole life. She should be able to be married and be part of a family. Years later, in the days of Rabbeinu Gershom, when he saw that men were abusing this privilege, what was going on in his day was that you had a scenario where men who were living, let's say, in Ashkenaz in Western Europe, they had business contacts in Eastern Europe, and it wasn't like you could just get on a plane and travel for the day and then come back. To make a trip out there to check on your business contacts was weeks, and then once you're there, you're going to stay for a while, and they didn't have anyone to make their bed, make their coffee, make their dinner, do their laundry, right? Well, because their family was back where they left them behind, so they would take a second wife, in the countries that their business was. And here, Rabbeinu Gershon saw this is not the Torah's intention, to have one family in one part of the world, another family in another part of the world, just so that you're taken care of and you don't have to feel lonely. That's not doing a service to either family and either wife and children that you're responsible for. So he put a stop to it, right? No more polygamy. But in this case, with Elkanah, it was very similar to what happened with Sarah and Abraham, right? They were married for a while, unable to have children. They did not have the medical miracles that we have today with fertility specialists. And it was really the urging of Hannah that she encouraged Elkanah to get another wife, much like Sarah was the one who encouraged Abraham to get another wife. We'll see that Elkanah was perfectly happy with Hannah. He loved her. It was it seemed to be a wonderful marriage, a wonderful relationship. It was at her urging that he brought Penina into the marriage. And he does, right? If the wife pushes you and gives you permission and encourages it to happen, he does. And Penina, thank God, was very fertile and had many children, 10 children to be exact. And so you can imagine for Hannah, on the one hand, she was selfless in that she wanted to see her husband have children, but at the same time, that had to be painful to watch one after the next after the next. Okay, the text goes on to tell us that he would go every year up to Shiloh, where the Mishkan was, to serve, and when he would go, he would bring his wife, he would bring his children. He went a different route every time, hoping to encourage people to follow him. They see this road trip, with the whole family going all packed up, picnic lunches on the side of the road, and he brought his little children. Much easier to leave them at home, right, with a babysitter, but he brought his little children because he wanted to make an impression on them when they were very young already, that this is something that you do. This is something significant to go and make a pilgrimage to the Mishkan, to Shiloh. I mentioned this in my shir I give on Wednesdays at Romer, so you'll hear the story again. But I remember when I was young, my parents came home one day and told my sister and myself, we were probably like 9 and 11 years old, that we have a big plan for the afternoon. We're going to hear Aaron Copland. And I remember we were looking at our parents like, who was Aaron Copland? They said, oh, he's a conductor of classical music. And we were like, you've got to be kidding. Like, what torture is this you're putting us through? And I remember my mother, Allah Shalom, very clearly saying, one day you'll be able to tell your grandchildren that you saw Aaron Copland. And I was in college when he passed away, and I remember reading his obituary in the New York Times, and I immediately called up my sister. We didn't have texting then. I called her up and said, can you believe it? We can tell our grandchildren. So thank God. But there's certain things that you want to make an impression on your children. You take them, even if it's not the most pleasant thing for the kids, but that's something that they remember. And to this day, it's something I remember. Okay, so they're at the Mishkan. We're just up to Pasuk Zion, Pasuk Chet, and Chana is very depressed. She won't eat. She's just terribly upset about the whole situation. It's just every year that goes by, she goes without a child, and she gets her portion, and Penina gets a bigger portion with everything for her children, and it becomes very, very depressing and very sad for her to have to experience this year after year. If you take a look at Pasuk Vav, this one we'll read inside. It says, "V'chi asat zaratza gam kaas," and her rival vexed her sore, ba'avor hari'ima, to make her fret, ki sagar Hashem ba'ad rachma, because Hashem had closed up her womb. So one of the reasons Chana was especially upset was because the text is telling us that Penina would taunt her. She would taunt her, and really in a very, very cruel way. She would say things like, "Oh, let's pack up all the lunches for everybody on the way," and like, "Oh, sorry, right? You don't have kids, so you have no one to pack up for." Or, "Time to go get everybody new shoes. Time to go shoe shop. Oh, yeah, you know what? It's fine. I'll go without you." That kind of thing. She would, highlight the fact that she had these children and Chana didn't. So the Mefarshim go out of the way to tell us that Penina really was very well intentioned, and it's hard to imagine someone being that cruel. But she didn't want Chana to become complacent with her situation. Right? At a certain point, sometimes people do just accept, right? This is the way it is, and I just have to accept it and move on with my life, which might not be an unhealthy thing. That could be a very positive thing. But Penina saw Chana was still young. She was still in her childbearing years. Why should she give up hope? Why should she just accept her situation? She should daven harder. She should try harder, whatever was in her ability to try to make herself have children. So in order to make sure she doesn't become complacent, she would needle her, and taunt her about the fact that she was childless and all the things that she could do with her children that poor Chana was unable to do. So again, she was definitely l'shem shamayim. We don't want to put that on Penina that she was evil and cruel. The problem is that even when you're l'shem shamayim, it's a very difficult thing to cause that kind of pain to somebody else. The mashal that I heard was, let's say there's, God forbid, a fire, and the Sefer Torah is burning. So you're l'shem shamayim, you want to save the Sefer Torah, you're going to reach in and grab it, but your hands are still going to get burnt. Right? That you can't avoid that. The hands are still going to get burnt. And there were consequences on Penina. We're told that later on, numerous children, 8 of her children, 8 out of 10, ended up dying as a consequence of this pain that she inflicted on Chana. How do we know it was the same Shemaim? Torah Shabbat Peh. Right, Torah Shabbat Peh seems to indicate that. That seems to be the consensus. In the Psukim, you don't see it. Correct. In the Psukim, you don't see it. Okay. Sorry?
Maybe they don't want us to see it that way.
It could be. It could be, right. I mean, I guess if you're just taking the text at face value, it's ambiguous. You don't know what her intentions are. You just know that she's being mean. And the reality is she is being mean. And even the sources acknowledge that that's mean. And whatever the objective to being mean was, even if it was really a kind objective, it doesn't matter, right? That's the bottom line, is it doesn't matter, right? Maybe that's why the text doesn't spell that out, what her intentions were, because the bottom line was it doesn't matter. Okay, so take a look ahead. Skip to Pasuk Chet. Right, this is a pattern year after year they would go. And we get it to Pasuk Chet. This is really a turning point. This year, when they go to the Mishkan, this is a turning point for Chana. She seems to have hit rock bottom. So Vayomer la Elkana Isha, Chana, Lama tivki, Lama lo tochli, right? So he sees her crying yet again, right? And he says he's trying to calm her down. He's trying to offer consolation. He says, "Why aren't you eating? Why are you so sad? Why is your heart so grieved?" He knows why. he knows why. It's not going to be a surprise to him what her answer is, but he's trying to find the right words to reach out to her and to console her. And then, this one he comes up with, Halo anochi tov lach me'asar banim. Am I not better for you than 10 sons? Right now, he means, again, we have a case of somebody who really means well. What he means to say is, I'm okay with this. I love you. I love our relationship. I love the marriage that we have. I love the mission that we have together as partners, as a couple. He goes, it's okay. It's fine if we don't have children, right? He's really accepting, and he wants her to accept this also. But what does she hear from him? She hears very loud and very clear that he's given up. Right? Now, maybe it's easier for him to give up because he has children with another wife, right? So for him, that's fine. He's got this family with Penina, and he loves her, and they have their dynamic. And he has his relationship with Han, and he loves her, and they have their dynamic. And for him, right, everything is well and good. It's the perfect balance. He's got everything that he needs. But that doesn't do it for her. Right? That doesn't do it for her. And when she hears that he gave up, that's what really, was the wake-up call to her to make her realize, the only one who I can depend on is myself, right? It's all on me to turn to God to make this happen. I can't, as opposed to, let's say, Yitzchak, who davened for Rivka, and where Rachel goes to Yaakov and asks him to daven for her when she says, Havali banim, right? It wanted to be the partnership, but in this case, it wasn't a partnership. She realized it's all on her. It has to be coming from her. So after they all ate and drank, she got up. She leaves. She leaves the room. She can't stand to be there anymore. Her pain is so intense and just so gut wrenching that she can't even be there anymore. And she goes out. She goes into the room where Eli was sitting, and it's such a poignant description because Eli, it just says he's just sitting there. Probably not very busy because not very many people were coming to the Mishkan to begin with. And he's just sitting there as if like nothing significant is going to happen. And the most significant thing in Jewish history, right? One of the most significant things is about to happen when she walks in the room. And I think this is one of the messages for Rosh Hashanah we'll summarize at the end. We'll go back to this point. But that you just never know at any moment how things could turn and how things could change and how significant any event might be. When you're just sitting there expecting nothing to happen, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing unusual, in walks this woman who's going to revolutionize, really everything, the leadership of the Jewish people and the way that we daven, right? And he had no idea, just sitting there, and then she walks. Pasuk Yud, Bihi Marat Nafesh v'titpalel al Hashem uvecho tivkeh. And again, she was really at rock bottom. She was bitter, and she cried, and she cried. Right? We know this is also a good theme for the Yamim Noraim that we said the gates of tears are never closed. Right? So if someone is crying real, sincere tears, if you're so moved by your pain, that's something Hashem always listens to. Hashem, the doors are always open, the gates are always open for that kind of emotion. And then I love the language of Atit Palel al Hashem, right? She davened, that literally means on God, right? It's essentially, and that's one of the messages of what tefillah is. It's taking everything that's weighing us down and that's burdening us and that we feel buried and, and desperate under, and taking it and putting it on God, right? He takes the burden from us. He helps share that burden with us. We don't have to carry it alone, right? And that's the language that she uses here. Okay, Pasuk Yud Aleph. Vatidor neder vatamar. So she made a vow, and she said, Hashem Tzvakot, Hashem of hosts, Imra'o tir'eh ba'ani amatecha, uzachartani v'lo tishkach et amatecha. If you can see the suffering of your maidservant, and you can remember and not forget your maidservant, v'natata l'amatecha zera anashim, and you give your maidservant a male child, unatativ l'Hashem kol yemei chayav. I will give him to God all of his days, umora lo yale al rosho, and no razor will come upon his head. I know there's so much to unpack in this pasuk. Let's try to take it apart and see what's going on here. So the Gemara in Brachos really analyzes line by line exactly what she's doing here. So first of all, it's not just that she's davening. She's making a vow. She's making a neder. And we know that nedarim are taken incredibly seriously in that, right? That's why Yom Kippur starts with Kol Nidre. That's why we do Hataras Nedarim before Rosh Hashanah. If we say something, we have to be true to our word. Words count. Words mean something. And so the fact that she's making a neder means she is 1,000% sincere that this is something she wants to follow through. And what is her request? Her request essentially is, give me a child, but then I'm going to give that child back to you. I know. What's so unique about this is that she is not just begging God and pleading with God and showing him her pain, which she does all of that, but she actually really thinks it through and comes up with an alternate plan that HaKadosh Baruch Hu might be able to fulfill. For whatever reason, it wasn't in her cards, right, that she should be able to normally conceive and have a baby and fulfill that maternal instinct that most women have. We want a child because there's just something in us that yearns to have a child. We're nurturers. We want to be able to cuddle and hold and sing to and watch grow, and hopefully, they'll be good to us when we get older. Yeah, my kids always love to joke, "Be nice to me, Mom, because I'm going to be picking out your nursing home." Right? Like, you always joke, you want your kids to take care of you when they're older, right? There's a lot of reasons why we want that child. We want to teach that child something. We want to feel there's a little piece of us left after we're gone. There's so many reasons that somebody wants a child. And, not that any of them are the wrong reasons, but they're all very self-focused, right? So maybe she's thinking to herself, maybe that's why, maybe that's not enough, right? Just for my own fulfillment, that's not enough. Hashem clearly is not granting me a child for this reason. But what if I don't make it about me anymore? What if, yes, I'll get my maternal instinct, fix by having a child, but now I'm going to strike a deal with God. I'm going to give this child back to you. I will raise him to be a servant of God. I won't even raise him. I'll keep him until he's weaned, and then I'm going to give him to the Kohen, and then he can really be someone who takes care of the Jewish people. Right? I mean, this is really a revolutionary idea of tefillah. And this is why, in general, we don't like to translate the word tefillah as prayer, because prayer comes from a Latin word which means to beg and to plead. From a Jewish perspective, that's a very small part of what tefillah is. Right? Tefillah comes from the word pilel, which means to judge. And when we say lehit palel, that's the reflexive. We're judging ourselves. When we stand in the presence of God, right, we're judging ourselves in the sense of, I have an audience with a king. What are my priorities going to be? What am I going to ask him for? Right? Why am I asking him for this? Why am I asking for wealth? Right? Is it because I just want to live in a nice house and drive a nice car? Or are there institutions that I want to support? And if that's the reason, why does it have to come from me? Why am I not davening for the institution? Why does it have to be me who's what? Right? There's all these thought processes and inner introspective mechanisms that are going on when we daven, and that we're judging ourselves. And that's what Hannah was doing. And she was saying, why do I want a child so badly? And maybe the reason why I want it isn't good enough. And she actually proposed an alternate plan to God. In Hebrew, we call that pagia. It's confrontation. Yaakov did it also. It says, Vayifka b'makom. When we look at when Yaakov instituted the Tefillah of Mariv, that was the language that was used. It was confrontation. And we'll see, it almost sounds a little bit chutzpahdik, the way that she talks to God, the way the Gemara analyzes these lines of tefillah. But that's something that she taught us. That's a way to approach Hashem, to say, I understand this about myself. Let me give you another way to do it. We talk about a theme of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur is Midas Hadin and Midas Harachamim. Right? So Midas Hadin, we always say, is strict justice, and Rachamim is mercy. But what does that mean in practice? Right? So I love this analogy. You have a washing machine, right? It breaks. It's happened to all of us, I'm sure, at some point in time, right? But very frustrating. It always breaks when you've got all the laundry from camp coming home, right? And so you have two options when it breaks. Midat Hadin is, it's not doing what it was created to do. It's made to wash clothes. If it's not washing the clothes, I'm trashing it, right? There's no point in keeping it because it's not doing what it was made to do. Midat Harachamim is, maybe we can fix it. Maybe there's just a part that there's something wrong with. And if, and even though it's not doing what it's made to do, if I can make a repair, if I can make a tweak here, if I can, get the guy to come out. And I remember one time it was the transmission of my wash. I didn't even know my washing machines had a transmission, but it was a transmission, right? But if you can fix it, then it can, then it can be saved, right? Hannah's trying to fix herself. She's trying to show us, she's trying to appeal to the Midat Harachamim. Don't just throw this out my opportunity to become a mother. Maybe there's another way we can do it that will make it work. Right? And again, it's such a revolutionary concept of what tefillah is. But yet, here it's highlighted that we should learn from this. This is a way to approach Hashem. Okay. The Gemara goes through a lot of the lines that she uses. First of all, it highlights that she's the first one to refer to Hashem as Hashem Tzivakot, the God of hosts. We say it all the time, so we don't feel like it's such a new concept. But for her, it was something that no one had ever described HaKadosh Baruch Hu that way. So two approaches to what she meant by that. One is, right, what are the hosts? It's referring to the heavenly beings, the sun, the moon, the stars, etc. So she says, or it could also be the angels, the malachim, the spiritual beings that are up in Shemayim. So she's saying to God, there's heavenly beings and there's earthly beings, right? You're the God of both. You're Hashem Tzivakot, and you're also the God of people. So she goes, look, if I'm an earthly being, I'm a physical human being, then let my biology work like a normal physical human being is, and I should be able to have a child. But if that's not going to work, and I'm more in the category of the heavenly things, then don't let me die, right? I should be eternal. I shouldn't be subject to the same biology as everybody else, right? So it's a little bit, I would say, chutzpahdik. It's confrontational of God, but yet she seems to, teach us that we have the right to make these kinds of statements, to think out what we want to say. The other possibility is that she says, God, as Hashem Tzivakot, you're the God over everything, not just what we can see, but even everything that we can't see, everything that's in the universe. And I don't know what they knew about the universe back then, but certainly less than what we do now. And even what we know now, we know there's so much that we don't know. And so Hashem, if you're the master of everything like that, how hard would it be to give me one child? Right? There's so much under your control. One child, right? That's all I'm asking for.
Did she think she deserved, that she was lacking and deserved onesh or punishment? Did she blame something in herself? Like, you judged me, Hashem, because you're the judge, but
right.
I
would assume that over the years that this has been going on, this is not the first time she's davening. This is the first time she davens like this, right? This is the first time she davens with this passion and this, and this well thought out in terms of how she wanted to approach Hashem. So I'm sure that as part of her self-reflection in her davening, she was working on things. She was improving herself and, tweaking her character and her midot and her actions.
I'm feeling like maybe I'm not worthy. I wasn't worthy. You judged me not worthy.
Right. But she wants to challenge that. She wants to say maybe she wasn't worthy to have it for the self-fulfillment, but maybe she's worthy to be able. And again, we're talking, Hannah was one of the Neviot, right? The Gemara Megillah says that there were 8 Neviot. She was on that list. So to become a Neviah, one has to be an incredibly perfected individual, right? Perfected in terms of your actions, perfected in terms of your intellect, perfections in terms of your theology. She was a very perfected individual. So, I mean, while I'm sure that thought must have crossed her mind, whatever she studied in herself that she felt was lacking, I'm sure she worked on improving. Not that anyone's perfect, but she was probably closer to perfect than most.
She's more accusing him of having forgotten her than having a real reason to deny her.
What did I do?
Right. Well, that's the thing she's saying. She doesn't know what his reason is, but she's giving him reasons why he should. She doesn't know what his reason. So if it's this, let me give you an alternate plan. And if it's, if you're too busy with other things, like this isn't so hard to do, right? And then, it gets worse when ra'ot tir'eh, right? If you see my suffering that we read in the pasuk, she says, that's great. If you see my suffering and you help me, that's great. That's the first ra'ot. But tir'eh, she says, see what I'm going to do if you don't respond. And what does the Gemara say? And we know there's a concept of an isha sota. And if a woman secludes herself with a man in a way that is suspect, and her husband gets jealous, and he warns her not to do it, and there's witnesses and the whole thing, and she ends up secluding herself again in front of witnesses, the husband can bring the wife to the Mishkan, Mikdash, whatever it was at the time, and she would have to go through the whole, examination process and end up drinking the waters of the Mei Sota, the waters of the Sota, right? A sheer for a different topic to understand that whole concept, but that was the reality. And the Torah says that if a woman drinks it and she's innocent, then what is the consequence? Is that she will become pregnant, right? That she will be blessed with children after that. I'm surprised she's the first one to figure that out. All the people with infertility, right? But that's how she challenges God, right? If you're not going to give me a child that way, you can do it the easy way, or we could do it the hard way. I'm willing to do it the hard way, right? But let's avoid that. Just give me a child and let's avoid that whole process. right? But again, that she has the chutzpah, right, to stand in front of God, and that the text tells us that not only is this acceptable, but this is what we should emulate.
It also sounds to take from what Mrs. Kahan was saying too, that at this point in time, whatever happened before, she's now found her tafkid, her shlichut, and had to articulate that in some way that would enable this to happen too.
Right, beautiful, beautiful. And then the Gemara also points out she uses the word amatecha 3 different times. And there she's highlighted, maybe this is addressing your issue. We know there's 3 mitzvot that women are judged for when it comes to childbirth. There is chala, hadlakat nerot, and nida. So the Gemara says she used that word 3 times to indicate that she was meticulous in all 3 of those mitzvot. In fact, her name is an acronym. Chana is chala, the chet is chala, nun is nida, and hey is hadlakat nerot. Right? Those were mitzvot that she actually embodied. And then she asked for zera anashim. So when I taught this in my Wednesday class, someone had, why does she care if it's a boy or a girl? She just wants a child. She just wants a child. So one approach is zera anashim just means an average child. Not necessarily a male child, but she didn't need anybody, to ace the SATs and get into Harvard and win the Nobel Prize. She was happy with just any child, an average child. Or you could argue if she was looking to give it back to God to be a servant in the Mishkan, then it would need to be a male, right? Because the women didn't do the avoda in the Mishkan. So, if that's the direction she was taking, it would make sense that she would ask for a male child. But in any case, again, she had very modest hopes for this child, right? She just wanted a child. She didn't care, what category it was in and the IQ and everything else. And then finally, when she says Mora lo ya'le al rosho, so it sounds like she's, agreeing that this child will be a nazir, right? That he won't get haircuts. But another reading of it could be Mora mem vav resh aleph, which would mean the fear of any person won't be on him. That essentially, if he's going to be a servant of God, right, and he's going to be a servant of the Jewish people, he's going to have to be his own person. He can't always be kowtowing to what other people are demanding of him, and suggesting is a nice way to say it, but we all know that sometimes people in leadership roles have a lot to deal with from the people whom they are serving, and she wanted somebody who had the self-worth and the self-confidence to be able to withstand that, not to be afraid of people, but to be able to stand for what is right and do the right thing. Here's discussion if she had if it was proper for her to make this kind of a vow on behalf of her child. Some say no, some say yes, it was an extenuating circumstance, and the general consensus is she was making this vow that she's going to make the attempt to raise him this way. Obviously, he has free will if he's going to follow that path or not, but certain things we inculcate in our children from the time they're very little. That's the path that they go on, and that's what she was hoping to be able to accomplish. Okay, it's a very intense tefillah, right? Clearly what she's doing there, she's very caught up in her own emotions and intellect, really. I mean, in terms of how she's thinking out what she's expressing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But if you look at Pasuk Yud Bet and Yud Gimel, it says, "V'haya ki hirbata lehitpalel lefnei Hashem." All the time that she was, standing there davening before God, ve'eli shomer piha, and Eli was watching her mouth. V'chana hi medaberet al liba, rak svateha naot v'kola lo yishamea, ve'achshaveha Eli l'shikora. He saw that she was speaking from her heart, like her mouth was moving, but there was no sound coming out, and he thought that she was drunk because he saw this distraught woman crying, probably swaying a little bit because she's very into what she's saying, and only her mouth is moving and no words are coming out. So the Gemara tells us this is, again, revolutionizing the method of tefillah, and until then, nobody davened privately like that just to themselves. It was always aloud, right? Everybody articulated every word that they had said. So Eli didn't understand that she was davening. He never realized that. He thought, if you're davening, you're saying the words out loud. But she's moving her mouth and she's not saying anything, and she's swaying and she's crying and she's distraught, probably red-faced and puffy eyes and everything else. He thought that she was drunk. And in addition to just what he saw, we know the Kohen Gadol, has a neat little tool called the Urim V'Tumim. Right? And when he wants to get some information from Hashem, maybe it's a little sacrilegious to refer to it this way, but I call it the Ouija board, right? It was a way to, you could get messages as the stones would light up, and you could put the words together. So the letters that you could arrange as Shikora came up, right? And so based on what he saw, that's how he interpreted the message of the Urim Vitumim. But that's not what was really happening, because you could also rearrange those letters as Kashera, right? That she's kosher. Right? What she is doing is halachically acceptable, and I would say halachically admirable. Right? This is something a way we should follow. Or you could read it as Kisara, that she is as righteous and as worthy and in the same situation as Sarah Imenu. So he castigates her. He wants to kick her out and send her on her way, and he really misjudges what's going on. When again the Gemara makes a point of saying we really learn the halachot of tefillah from Chana, that one should say the words quietly, that only you can hear it and nobody else. But at the same time, one should be articulating them. You should be moving your mouth, not just saying it in your head. And that one shouldn't raise their voice too loud in the course of davening, and also of course that one shouldn't be drunk when they daven. But that's not as not as live as inspiring a point. But nevertheless, this is how he judges her. When she confronts him, and she corrects him, trying to be respectful. Although she refers to him, she says "Lo Adoni," right? Not just "No, my master," but "Lo Adoni." You're not a master here in this situation. You're not. You're misreading everything terribly. And she explains what the situation is, and he really feels terrible, right? As any one of us would feel if we've ever been in a situation where we've judged somebody not favorably when we probably should have, and then we find out how badly we misjudged. Hopefully they don't always know that we've misjudged so badly, but in this case she knew, and he was called on it. And so he blesses her, Pasuk Yud Zayin, after she explains what's going on. He tells her, L'chi l'shalom, v'elokei Yisrael yitain et shelatech asher sha'alt me'imo. Should go in peace, and Hashem should grant you what you asked for today. So the Gemara learns from here that that's the tikkun. If one does misjudge somebody, the best thing you can do is offer them a bracha, is wish them well, and obviously apologize, own up to it, and then wish the person well. We learn that from Eli. And then look at Pasuk Yud Chet. It says Vatomer Timsas Shibchatcha Chen Be'enecha. Let your servant find favor in your eyes. Vatelech ha'isha l'darka, and she went on her way. Vatochal, and she ate. Prior to this, she wasn't eating anything. Ufana lo hayula od, and she just didn't have that sad look on her face anymore. Now, let me remind you, she's not pregnant yet. She doesn't even know for sure that she's going to get pregnant. But just that experience of standing in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu and confronting him and thinking through what she wanted to say and proposing an alternate plan and getting the bracha from Eli, just that changed her whole mindset. Her whole psyche was different. She went in a broken, barren woman, and she came out a woman with optimism and hope and joy. Right? And ready to go out. And, who knows? Maybe 6 months later, if she didn't get pregnant, she'd be back in the same place. I don't know. But the fact that just going through the experience was something, right? And that's something, again, a message for us in terms of tefillah. Sometimes the experience of personal growth that we get just through encountering a Kadosh Baruch Hu is even more valuable than getting what we were asking for. And that's, I think, what it means when the Gemara talks about the avot and the imahot being barren. The Gemara says because Hashem desires to hear the tefillot of the righteous. So that's why he withheld children for them. I don't think that means that God is sadistic and, God forbid, and withholds children from people just because he wants to hear their praises, but because he understands that people, tefillah is an opportunity to grow. Tefillah is an opportunity to be introspective and to get to know yourself a little bit better and to change your priorities and change around your values and make a different type of contribution than you might have originally thought. And that in and of itself has value. And what's beautiful for Chana, and we know this medically today, statistics show, I believe this is correct, that after people who are childless, when they adopt, the odds of having children go up by about a third. Right? They have a third greater chance of having children after adoption because the mindset changes, the psyche changes, the stress isn't there, the depression isn't there anymore. When we lived in Michigan, we had a lovely, lovely couple in our shul, married many years, never had children, adopted 4 kids, and then she got pregnant with triplets. It was amazing. I mean, it was just amazing. And you never saw this woman without a smile on her face, and she had 7 kids, probably under the age of 9. I mean, it was really unbelievable. But there's that. And I'm not saying it didn't come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that she was granted a child, but I think that when the mindset changes, that affects the biology also, and so Hashem did grant her this nace. Um, okay, so she has children. She gets pregnant. She gives birth to Shmuel Hanavi. He's not Shmuel Hanavi yet, but she's able to give birth to Shmuel. Take a look at Pasuk Chaf. It says, Vayhi kufat hayamim, when the time had come about, Vatahar Chana vateled bain, she got pregnant and she had the son, Vatikra et Shmo Shmuel. Why did she call him Shmuel? Ki me Hashem she'iltiv, because I have asked him from God. But another way to read that word Sheol is I borrowed him from God. Right? God lent him to me. Because essentially what was she doing? She was taking that child and giving him back. Right? She recognized he's not really mine. He's alone. Right? That's the classic story of Rabbi Meir and Bruria. Right? And that tragic story when Rabbi Meir goes off to shul and their 2 boys tragically suddenly died on a Shabbos afternoon, and she doesn't know how to break the news to her husband, and he comes home from shul and he asks, they weren't in mincha, they weren't in Shalosh, where were the boys? And she distracts him. She says, here, make Havdalah. So he makes Havdalah, then he asks again, and she distracts him again and brings him his Malava Malka. And finally, he asks the 3rd time. So she said, listen, I have a halachic question for you. She says, somebody, years ago gave me something to hold on to, 2 precious stones. He asked me to watch for him. And now he's come back and he wants them back. What's the halacha? Am I obligated to give it back, or can I keep them? And Rabbi Meir, who must have not known why she was asking such an elementary question, because we know Bruria had a brilliant mind, patiently says, I'm sorry, but the halacha is you have to return it. So at that point, she takes his hand, she leads him up the stairs into the room where the bodies of the boys are, and he bemoans and he wails and he's crying, he's beside himself, and she gently, says to him, but Rebbe, she goes, didn't you just tell me that if someone lent you something, you have to return it when it's, when they want it back? And that's the idea with children. That's the idea with money, with wealth, with material things. We have to view ourselves, it's on loan. Hashem gave it to us to use for a specific purpose, but it's not ours. And that's also a wonderful message for Rosh Hashanah. When we take stock of everything that we have, are we using everything that we have in the service of Hashem or not? Right? And in this case, it was, she understood that this was a loan from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, the Haftarah continues, and when she finally brings him back to the Mishkan and gives him over, Eli recognizes that this is a wonderkind, right? There's something very special and unique about him. But if you can take a look at the last page, and then the Haftarah concludes with what we call the Shirat Chana. We don't have time to go into it, but it's really beautiful language where, it's not just that she begs and she pleads and she confronts and she challenges God and she gets her request. She doesn't forget to say thank you. She doesn't forget to praise Hashem for this nace of being granted the gift of a child. And she really highlights one of the themes of her tefillah at the end is how life can turn on a dime. Don't go in thinking just because you're in this place now doesn't mean you can't be on top. And if you're on the top, it doesn't mean things won't turn around for you, which we all know is a truism about life. But take a look at a couple of sources. The first one we sort of did inside already, what halacha we learn out from Chana about tefillah. But take a look at source number 2 for a minute. This is from the Rav Soloveitchik Machzor. It's really beautiful. He says, Chana is the prototype of prayer, for the essence of prayer is to stand before God, before the Shekhinah, devoid of all pretense and the accoutrements of power, in lonely communion with God. The silent prayer of Chana reflects intimacy. There are certain subjects which we are willing to discuss with colleagues and friends. More sensitive and intimate matters are reserved only for a spouse in the privacy of one's home. But the ultimate in intimate communication is prayer. It is that dimension of communication that is exemplified by the silence of Chana's prayer. The attribute of intimacy and the humble knowledge that we are totally dependent on God is most profound in women, as expressed by the verse, Kol kvoda bat melech panima. Men often find intimate conversation difficult and in some cases demeaning because it threatens to strip a man of his veneer of strength. It is therefore a woman who was chosen by providence to be the prototype of the silent Shemona Esrei. So just in case we didn't have enough nice things to say about Hannah, right? That would explain why why it was her tefillah specifically that was so poignant and really set the standard for everybody's tefillah afterwards. It's that intimacy. It's that really again taking everything that's on us and putting it on God in a very very open and direct way. Okay, we have 5 minutes left. I just want to conclude with some of the, as I said, we go back to some of the themes and the connections to Rosh
This
Hashanah.
concludes our community Yom Iyun. Thank you so much for attending. Please feel
I
free
thought
to
we had
take
till
a coffee
12:15.
to coffee at Yael. We look forward to seeing you
Okay, if
next
anyone
year.
has to go, feel free to
Bye-bye.
walk out, but I'll give you 5 more minutes just so in addition to the idea that she was remembered on Rosh Hashanah, and it's interesting, it says that she mentions Hashem's name 9 different times. It corresponds to the 9 brachot that we say in the Musaf on Rosh Hashanah. So it's not just in the liturgy that we read, but it's also in the tefillah. But okay, another message is, as we said about Elkanah, the power of one, right? That one person can really make a difference and can really change things. And that's a theme on Rosh Hashanah. The Rambam describes, right, everyone should see the scales, right? And everyone should look at themselves as if their good deeds and their bad deeds are exactly equal. And every deed that you do has the potential to tip the scale in your favor or, God forbid, against you, right? One deed, one action, right? To remember that and to think of that every time before we do something, that it can make the difference in terms of how we're judged. The power of one. One always makes a difference. The Rambam says it for humanity also, right? Look at the world as everything is on the balance, and anything that one person does can make the difference in terms of which way we're going to tip the scale. So to always remember the power of one, that ish echad. Second idea is that Hannah came to the realization that only Hashem could help her. Right? You should forget doctors, forget any kinds of practices that people wanted to tell her about, fertility practices, and even her husband. She couldn't rely on him because he was satisfied with the situation. He didn't feel that same desperation that she did. And ultimately, when we stand in front of Hashem in tefillah, that's why we don't daven. We don't have the same theology as Christianity that families that pray together stay together. We don't pray together as a family. There's a mechitza, right? Husbands and wives are separated when they're davening. It's everybody alone before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because that's ultimately what it is. And that's the theme of Malchiot on Rosh Hashanah, is that ultimately we are dependent on the sovereignty of God and God alone. I mean, he has his messengers that help things along and help things happen, but it's all dependent on the will of Hashem. Another idea is Eli sitting and waiting, as we described, not knowing the importance and the significance of what was going to happen, that we should sort of have in the back of our minds always, that who knows how life is going to change on any given day, and who knows how the next person we meet or the next event that we're involved in could make an impact that that affects future generations. You just don't know, and to always be ready for those, because it seems that Eli was not, right? That he misjudged her rather than seeing her favorably, at least at the outset. And then finally, and this is source number 3 on the page that you were looking at before, also from Rav Soloveitchik on Al HaTshuva. So he describes the word tshuva, very interesting. When it's seen in the context of Tanakh, it's always something coming full circle. When you return, you're coming full circle. And the theme that he wants to reflect here is that when a person moves away from God, it's not linear. If Hashem is here and we sin and we're not moving in this direction, it's a circular motion. What's the difference between linear and circular? Is that linear, you're just moving farther and farther away. But circular, for every point you move further away, you're also moving one step closer. Right? Last night in Slichos, we said the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, Hashem Kel Rachum V'Chanun. So the famous Rashi says why 2 Hashems? There's Hashem before a person sins, and there's a Hashem after a person sins. Right? So we're moving away from Hashem when we sin, but we're also moving back closer. And that word teshuvato, that coming full circle, is described by Shmuel Hanavi. It says when he was older and he was a servant of the Jewish people, he would make a circuit. Literally, he'd go from Mitzpeh to Gilgal. We'll read it inside. I don't remember the names of the towns, to Beit El. But then he would always end up coming home to Ramah. He would always come back to where it all began, to where his mother was, to his source of life and his source of strength, and the one who imbued in him that this was his mission. He always came back. And the Rev, we won't read it inside, but you can read it on your own. But the Rev says so beautifully that that's really a beautiful metaphor for us, that the 2 points on the circle that are furthest away are also the ones that are closest together. And we should be like Shmuel, always going in a circular motion. We might be moving further and further and further away from our home base, from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but with every step we take away, we're also moving closer. No matter how big that circle is, right, the optimistic point and the hopeful point is that we're always moving closer. And if we can focus on that, we can get back home that much faster. And with that, I wish everyone a Shana Tova, a Ksiva V'Chasima Tova, and an inspiring Yamim Noraim. Thank you.